Property and Finance Committee meeting to order. We'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Lee Graff, Alderperson.
Scott Kelly, Alderperson.
Sue Schell, City Attorney.
Tom Riel, Alderperson.
Jennifer Gossick, City Clerk.
Joe Eichstadt, City Engineer. Joe Terry, Director of Public Works.
Jake Catnall, Alderperson. Joe Zerflo, Alderperson.
Sarah Slutsky, Wood County Health Department. Caitlin Shuda, Daily Tribune.
Jim DeSarcy, Finance Director.
Shane Blazer.
Zach Froelich, Mayor.
And Steve Coe, Alderperson. All right. First up, we have consider accepting a bid and authorizing awarding a contract to Jenke General Contractors for the East Riverbank Project Phase 2. You want me to start with Tim on that one?
I think I'll just make a couple comments, and I think Joe probably would speak to more of it. This is the normal course of process, as was discussed at budget. The question was raised, the sequence of events, right? We have our engineering estimates, we establish our budget based upon the best available information at that time. The budget then is considered and adopted, and then as Joe had indicated in his memo, the project was let for bidding earlier this year, February, March timeframe, and we just received bids back, or the bid opening was just a couple of weeks ago, and so we've got the conclusion of that process. So the next step in the process would be to consider an award of a contract, just like we would any other project, or just like the pool project, also later on our agenda. This project, I think, as Joe will talk about, is maybe less ideal from the standpoint of quantity of bidders. And he can talk a little bit about reasons why we don't have multiple bidders on this project, based upon those that pulled plans but didn't actually submit bids. But I think in the summary document that Joe has said on the back of his memo, one thing that concerns me a little bit is we set a budget for the project based upon the estimates that MSA had been working on. We didn't receive the final engineer's estimates until we were ready to let the project earlier this year. And there was a substantial difference. So right off the bat, from the budgeted amount, which is 1.167 390, to the final engineer's estimates of 1.348 585. All in the global budget for the project, that includes our staff time and construction services outside of the actual contractor work, as well as contingency. Something that did not get included in the first phase work was 1.538 800,000. So I guess there's a lot of detail and nuances we can talk about with the whole bid letting and bid award process, but ultimately the project, we're walking away from this tonight. One course of action would be to consider keeping the scope of the project the same, but increasing the city's contribution to that. The second course of action would be to consider a reduced scope, much more in line with what the city agreed to budget for it, which is where my position lies. I don't think, we went through a lot of debate and discussion around the true cost of that project, and it's unfortunate that the engineer's estimates came in higher than what we had budgeted. We had established at that time, when we passed the budget last year, a commitment to the project and to a funding level, and for a variety of reasons, the bid and the engineer's estimates were higher than we budgeted for. So I don't think I'm in a position to recommend to the city or to the city council to fund additional dollars to the project. So based upon that, we turn it over to Joe to talk a little bit about some of the nuances, but I think environmentally, just what's happening in the public sector bid world right now is steel prices. When we opened the bid, steel prices were $50,000 more than what originally the estimates included. Concrete, some additions with concrete pricing, and then the contractors also advise us that from a labor standpoint, they've had to really increase their commitment to their workforce, and it's come through the form of health insurance to retain their labor pool, because labor is being pulled on these types of, in this world, to a lot of the projects in southeastern Wisconsin associated with Foxconn and such. So there was a material impact to labor cost in the project. So we had a discussion internally saying, if we're going to keep the contribution and the commitment that the city had flat, but still accomplish the project for the sake of the grant and what we had budgeted, there was kind of a path to get there. And so I'll have Joe talk through and maybe elaborate on anything that I may have said that you wanted to make these guys
Sure. So, as the mayor mentioned, we did have a list of plan holders. We had 5 plan holders for the project. All reputable contractors. They were all pre-qualified to bid, so they were definitely interested in the project. They qualified to bid. At bid time, we only got 1 bid from Yankee General Contractors. We did follow up with all 5 plan holders, or the 4 other plan holders, to see why they didn't bid. Some of those reasons were articulated there in the memo, but it was a variety of reasons. They already had work booked. As it got closer to bid time, they just said, well, we've got our plates full. We're not going to bid. Another contractor he did get information back at bid time from suppliers and subcontractors. And by the time you realized that, it was too late. So of the 5 plan holders, we really tossed around the idea of rebidding the project. The likelihood of getting 2 bidders on a rebid type situation is unlikely. We might get one new bidder. I would suspect that Yankee would not rebid. So we'd likely be back in the same single bid situation. And as the mayor mentioned too, so we've got the bid pricing, we've got our budget that was identified and the gap thereof. So basically we went to work to see how can we get the project back to within budget. That's what the second side of the memo really tries to lay out and address. We did that in two primary areas. The first thing was reviewing all of the bid numbers and talking with the contractor. There were some red flags that we had on some things that seemed quite a bit out of line. So we talked to Yankee about it, explained what the intentions were with the plans, and clarified some things. They went back and identified about $91,000 in unit cost adjustments for the wall cap. And the wall cap is a concrete cap on top of the wall, basically where the new railing would get mounted. And so that was one component that we looked at. The other cost component that we looked at is quantity adjustments in Mead Rapids View Park. Basically taking a look at that and seeing what things could be reduced and adjusted to pull that project cost down to something that was within budget. So we identified $260,000 in costs there as an option. It could be removed. That puts us to within $100,000 of our budget. So the budget of $1.54 million. We're with that option and the unit cost adjustments from the contractor standpoint, we're within $100,000 of the budget. So there's a couple other areas where we looked at from looking at costs. So phase 1, their MSA, the consultant's still projecting potentially $140,000 of unspent funds in that project. Time will tell how that all plays out, but that's identified. If it becomes available, it could be allocated to the project to basically fulfill the $100,000 gap. The furnishing costs, there's $50,000 that's identified for furnishings for the project. I guess that's still up for consideration on if additional funds would be needed for that or not. But the remaining phase 1 dollars could fund that furnishing costs. I guess with all that said, the project wouldn't have, at this point, it wouldn't have any contingency going into construction. That occurred with phase 1 as well. We were able to manage that project closely, and nothing presented itself that was detrimental, that required a change order that push that where we needed a contingency. It's always good to have a contingency, especially on a $1 million+ project, but that's kind of where costs are at this point. So the recommendation would be to award the base bid of the project with the unit costs and quantity adjustments in the Rapids View Park being taken into account. And, at such time that the contract would be signed, we would work a change order at the same time and make those adjustments into the contract.
Then the second component that we may want to take in a second step would be the Riverwall analysis that was discussed and advocated to be included as an alternate in the project. So before we go too far off the piece, we should talk about that and address it. And we've got some thoughts and recommendations based upon including that in the bid and how that shook out. So I guess just want to make the committee aware we should address probably the base bid portion and then talk about what the alternate generated for costs and how we would recommend proceeding.
Question for you, Joe.
Sure.
So we didn't do a long discussion on bid alternates on this project, and it was decided that we're not going to do bid alternates. So are you cherry picking things out of this project to get it closer to the budget? And can we do that without having alternates?
So it's not, so the unit costs unit costs and quantities are being adjusted. So the actual bid items are all the same bid items.
So we downsizing some parts of the project?
In Mead Rapids View Park, the option would be to reduce the size of that project and limit it to the railing and the reinforced concrete trail directly behind the.
And we're able to
behind the
do that
river wall.
with bidded projects then?
Yeah, I believe so. I think traditionally it kind of comes under a value engineering standpoint, and that if we can figure out a way that the contractor can figure out a way to do it cheaper. And the city retains the right to adjust quantities and up to a certain percentage.
Okay, I didn't know that we could adjust without alternates. I thought we had to accept a bid as it was. So on any project that we bid, we can make adjustments?
So so you have to award it on the base bid.
Okay.
So that's kind of the foundational item that even if this project were to move forward, we'd have to award the project on the $1.79 million project. Discussions.
1.8? Is it 1.8?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially 1.8.
Almost 1.9?
And so yeah, that's in competitive bidding, we'd have to award on
And
the
they're,
base bid.
and they're just agreeing that they'll downsize these areas?
Yeah, the unit cost adjustments, quantity adjustments that would come immediately subsequent to contract signing, probably at the same time.
I just want to make sure I get the process right.
So in the event that the contractor says, hey, this 91,000 that we talked about, that's off the table, well, they would all be right there together, contract and change order.
Okay.
And that's critical because we don't have a funding source beyond the original estimates that we had shared for the project. And that was the conversation with the contractor to say, are these realistic items that you would be willing to change order out or adjust quantities on? Or we're prepared to either rebid or whatever other option. There's probably some other options to it then.
Okay. I didn't know that there's some flexibility in a bid without alternates, because I thought that was the whole purpose of alternates is.
We did have some alternates in there. There
We
was
did,
the,
yep.
the
Right.
retaining wall alternate, and then there were some benches, lamp posts, and there's another deduct about starting work because there's a question about 4th of July and wanting to kind of have them hold off on work. They chose not to allow any. I think there were 4 or 5 based upon the bid of alternates, of which we wouldn't be awarding as well, right? Because we're already up against that upper bounds.
I think it would be a further challenge if there were multiple bidders on the project and trying to work through some of these cost components.
Because then you would have to do that with all of them.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Hate to say it, but I won't say it. But okay, I get it.
Anyone else have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I guess my understanding is the recommendation is move forward. What's budgeted would be the only money that would be spent. There wouldn't be anything that would come back on the back end and say, we need more money for this, or we need more money for that.
Could be contingencies, there's none.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, could be through a change order at some point that, something would come up that, hey, we've got more quantities here, or this became known during construction that we need to address.
And the way the construction management that we've got budgeted in there, how that cost reduction is because they were on the project as they were constructing it.
Right.
So as value engineering opportunities came about to reduce costs, they exercised that right or opportunity to do so without materially impacting the overall project.
Right.
And I think that's, in some respects, it's paying for themselves, right? Because they're managing it on site. But I would see, and that was already included in the budget too. So I would suggest that, knowing where the pricing came in at this project based upon the bid amount and the final budget, after we approved our budget, that, we would expect the same, that there's going to continue to be watching for opportunities where cost savings could happen. We also had a discussion about, are there any benefits to us providing materials through our contracts, topsoil, rock, or any of those things, and it looked to be that there wasn't much of an advantage. We'll do it where it makes sense, but it's not materially, we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars of benefit. And the same goes for our crew and equipment, that we've got our crew's equipment on a schedule, and there didn't seem to be any advantage to us to having us truck or mobilize any of that piece based upon our costs and the cost accounting of labor where it's already allocated. But yeah, I would stress though that if there wasn't approval at the previous, or at the budgeted amount, there wouldn't be any contingency. So we would potentially be meeting to discuss those. Tim has maybe something to say.
Yeah, just to be clear on the funding, it's, the project we funded with the $625,000 stewardship grant, $912,000 of 2019 bond proceeds, and then I think Joe alluded to it further earlier, is that last month we carried over $397,000. You carry over to finish phase one. Of that 395, is estimated at 280,000 would be for Yankee, but with where they're going to come under contract, with that $140,000 would then be earmarked for phase two to get us up to that 1.68 change. So
That's if they come in with 140, right? Or are we?
well, based
know
on
for
what
sure?
MSA said, and they're under that.
That's what.
But we're not done, and that's not the final amount, though, correct?
That's true. I mean, it's projected to be the final amount, but we're not, the work isn't done. Yeah.
Correct.
So then just to elaborate a little bit on the additive bid alternate for the tuck pointing and maintenance work on the river wall. There was an alternate on the bid. The bid pricing came in at $729,000. What was estimated by MSA just before, right at bid time, was $550,000. So it was a bit more than we had anticipated early on, discussing it with the committee and council as well. But when we talked with Yankee, there were some issues that we presented to them with the method on which they bid the project on. We were looking at pouring a concrete wall at the base of the river wall. That's what we had included into the project plans. That became, we became aware that it's going to be problematic from a DNR permit standpoint. And so Yankee's bid included tuck pointing above the water level, and it included a concrete wall below the water level. And seeing as we couldn't do the concrete wall, we'd be left with tuck pointing below the river level too. And so it really is the only means of doing any sort of maintenance work on the wall below water. And so what we were thinking about doing, and we've got adjusted estimates, I guess I'd say, is that modify that work to only be the tuck point above the water level at this point, and evaluate the just evaluate the condition of the river wall underneath the water level, That's what's identified in the memo. That reduces the cost down to $364,000. It would provide the city with assessment of the condition below the water level. An alternative to that would be that we could forego it with this contract work. We did verify with Yankee that their work would be via barge on the river side of the wall, and there would be little to no impact to the park area. And that they could, it's maintenance work, we don't have to bid it out. We can do a time and materials sort of contract. With any contractor, we can solicit other proposals to kind of validate these prices that were presented as another option.
With that second option, the benefit of that is that we would have the analysis of the below water level conditions. So the scope of the maintenance would be known at that point. Does 10% of it need to be pointed under the water? Does 100% need to be pointed under the water? At this point, we don't know. And it's important for us to know. So Yankee also, help me recollect, I believe they had stated that whether the tuck pointing was done in 2019 or 2020, if we wanted them to evaluate and do all of it, they would honor this price through 2020, if I recollect.
Those 2 years, right? And that was irregardless if we decided to do it all in one shot or if we wanted to break it up, they were willing to hold the price. And I think, all of us have been left with this question of what truly, we've had I'll back up, we had a structural engineer do a full assessment of the river wall's structural integrity, which demonstrated that structurally the wall is fine. There are maintenance things that need to occur, right? And that's, I think, the conversation we had last fall around budgeting is tuck pointing and just routine maintenance needs to occur, at least on the surface that we can see, but we didn't have a feeling of the underwater level surface, and that's when the plan was drawn up to have the concrete wall poured at the base. Well, then the DNR informed us, as Joe said, we can't permit that work, so you can't do it. So at that point, Yankee had suggested, well, have you had divers go down and look at it? And we said, well, we didn't have divers. We haven't spent any money on a further assessment besides the structural integrity. And so they had proposed to us to use their diving crew. They do this work on DOT bridges and other below water surfaces around the service area that they do work. And so they offered with an assessment that we would perhaps bring back to this body as a scope of work to do a full assessment of the below water surface. So we know to what extent that work needs to be addressed, so we can then put a cost associated with all of the work. And I think a big concern that was shared was, to Joe's point, to restate that the work would occur at the river side, the wall side, not over the parks. And so knowing that they would do barge and scaffolding work at the wall side, there isn't any concern about, they didn't have any concern about letting the project for the park work and doing the wall maintenance separately or later or whatever is ultimately decided. So I think we just wanted to stress a couple of those points that I think from a dollars and cents standpoint, there isn't any advantage for us to just go ahead and do the work without really knowing anything beyond the below water surface. And I don't know if they've shared any pricing on the diver component, but at this stage, they would fit it into the regular diver schedule and then come back probably with a time and materials estimate for us to consider the below water level work. And we didn't have that work budgeted or identified before, that's why it was an alternate. So that would be something that would be unfunded at this time. And personally, I'd feel much better if we had a better handle on the extent of that work, and then knowing that, and Joe can speak to the engineering integrity of the work, or other Joe for that matter, around what's the timeline of this work, should this work be completed. I know there were some questions by council members that how long can this, over what period of time can we address the maintenance of the wall? And I think it behooves us to do more exploration and more fact finding than to just throw a bunch of money that we don't have, right? Because it hasn't been identified in our process, in our public works construction activities. We had in our capital improvements plan identified $50,000 a year over a period of time to start doing that work. but I think the below water surface could end up being higher priority than the above water surface, and at that point, we should plan and prioritize that work and not just bite it off right now. So I don't know if you want to comment on just in terms of the sequencing or restate your previous beliefs around when that work, or what the report, the analysis, the findings of the above water work of when that should be completed.
Yeah, so I mean, given the lack of concern by the structural report, my assessment was that the tuck pointing work is something that we should have, be doing and have done within 5 years or so. I don't see any particular risk involved in delaying it for a year or 2 or 3. Certainly something that we need to do at some point in time here in the future, but given that there are no structural concerns with the wall, I don't see it as an imminent threat.
It's also been a question raised, given that Riverwall assets in federal, FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission territory in the Centralia Dam's permit service area, might there be some responsibility of QEPCO in dealing and addressing this, knowing, despite it being a city asset, that park exists and that river, the space beyond that river, behind the Riverwall, exists for recreational purposes, which is purely identified in FERC's permit that would be assigned to QEPCO's operation of the dam. So, and that's something we haven't affirmed or denied, gotten any information on, but might there be a financial responsibility that they would have in that regard?
Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I guess I'd just say, I'd hate to give up the grant money that we have awarded to this project, but I am concerned with the fact that we only got one bid. It came in way over, and we're having to do a lot of different things to try to get it down to the budgeted amount. Not to mention, we got another project on the same agenda that we're gonna be talking about. So,
I agree. I have never been in favor of this project. I'm concerned that there's no contingency. My other concern is we're spending, I'm not into the coupon effect. Just because we have a grant money doesn't mean we need to spend $1 million to take advantage of that grant. If we were increasing our park space, all we're doing is wiping it clean and just giving it a new makeup. And I'm not in favor of it, and I won't vote in favor of it for those reasons.
As you think about this, though, I would like you to think about what, there are a number of maintenance activities, the railing, in the park and all those things that, 11 years ago, the staff brought to the city council that those were maintenance items that needed to be done. And over that period of time, council wanted to change and look at beyond the project. If we don't do the project, we still have all these maintenance activities that we still need to take care of. How do we want to do that?
Maybe that should have been a bid alternate, but we didn't want to do very many bid alternates. We had a big discussion about it. Maybe we should have just had a bid alternate just to do those maintenance things to see what that price came in at.
I'm just curious, we have $140,000 left over from phase 1. Did any of that money get counted, or what kind of damage did we see with the recent floodings to phase 1? So our return, the last time we had talked, was potentially over $200,000 in returns from phase 1. Now it's down to 140. Just wondering if you could give me an idea of the type of damage that Yankee charged us for replacing, if any. What are we looking at now in Demetz? That would
address that one.
Yeah, so I met with Yankee yesterday along with MSA. We walked in their landscaping subcontractor. We walked the project, looked at all the items in East Riverbank Conservancy, Damage Park. There's areas of sidewalk that's eroded underneath the sidewalk. There's a lot of topsoil that, it's got rocks and sand in it now, and so that's some cleanup stuff to do there and probably bring in some more topsoil. What came out of that meeting was by contract, Yankee carries liability insurance, damage insurance for these types of things. They also have installation floater on top of that insurance, along with flooding insurance that was specific to this project. And they're going to put together an estimate of all the damage, and they're looking into their insurance company and seeing how's this going to shake out, and they're going to provide a schedule for remediation of those damages.
So potentially, we could be looking at far less than 140,000 in return for phase one, assuming that we're going to have to remove some of the sidewalk to recompact the soil underneath the sidewalk.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is their insurance that they're required to have for the project, 'cause the project is still their project. It wasn't complete yet. Still their site, they're responsible for it, that it would fall under their insurance that they needed to have for the project.
Was the riprap washed away? Because I could have swore I seen some sections that weren't there anymore.
No, I didn't notice any of that.
Okay. And then was it our equipment or was it Yankee's equipment that was in there already this spring?
That's Yankee's subcontractor.
That was doing landscaping work, kind of evaluation of what currently?
Yeah, getting things cleaned up from winter. There was a bunch of erosion matting that had blown off a lot of the slopes in Devon's Park, and starting to kind of get things tidied up.
My other question, as far as the alternative goes in the river wall, I understand it's a maintenance activity, but what level or elevation did they give you on the river above grade that they were going to look into at this bid?
It was just the ordinary high water mark?
The high water mark?
The ordinary high water mark?
We have an opportunity to drop the river level, given notice to the public for any construction type activities to a certain percentage.
We do not.
How is it any different than what we do at work, where we have to put splash planking in, we have to drop the river with public notice, 48 hours of public notice?
If the dam needs maintenance or repair, the owner of the dam can do that. We can't. The city can't. The city has, we've checked with Domtar, and there are no plans for any scheduled maintenance activities at Centralia during the 2019 calendar year. That was something that we talked about for, potentially in the next 5 years, might there be some reconstruction work at the Centralia Dam if the water's drawn down? All of a sudden, that project gets a lot easier, even for the evaluation. It gets easier.
Well, just to be clear, we are doing construction work to Centralia Dam. So the water will be drawn down, the splash planking's out, so we have to have it at a minimum level in order to rebuild that.
The splash planking, right, but yeah.
So Domtar, when we reached out in the last 2 weeks, asked because that was part of the consideration of whether or not it made sense to forego any action on the alternate for the wall, and they explicitly said no.
Any long term, but what's the time frame in tuck pointing and type activities? I mean, we wouldn't be looking to do that this spring. So if that's the case, then ultimately, you're right, they wouldn't have any construction, but they're looking to do it this spring, like within a few weeks.
You're saying they, meaning Domtar? was looking at
What
it?
type of drawdown?
I could find out tomorrow.
That'd be helpful, because the official word that I got from Domtar is that there wouldn't be measurable drawdown on the north of Centralia, but if there is, and that's changed, that would be advantageous to know.
Right.
Because
But
we could
regardless,
potentially,
if we approved it tonight, we wouldn't have Yankee wouldn't be doing the barge work within the next month anyway, right?
probably not. But the assessment, certainly, we may be able to do the assessment if it's drawn down such that we could see it.
Yeah, the diver cost would then go away.
My other question is, the long-term plans of the city have never specified repair work to the dam or to the river wall.
Yeah.
Any of the documents that I've seen have ever specified any planned scope of work for maintenance activities to the wall in which we need to be budgeting for.
Yeah, I think the capital improvement plan, at least in draft phase, had $50,000 a year over the next 6 or 8 years. CIP only goes out 5, but for those types of activities. So this would replace, if we were to do it all in one shot, it would replace 5 or 6 years worth of smaller amounts.
I I went over my files and the paper documentation of the long-term plan, and I did not see any contingencies for repair work to the wall, so if you have a document that says
Sure.
it, I'd like to see it.
That's what you reviewed, Joe, at Public Works, right? With the capital improvement plan, so it's in that document that you're referring to.
And that was the document I looked at, and maybe I missed it, but maybe you could resend it to me to
Sure.
make sure I've got the updated version.
Yeah. And it's crucial, right? Because you think about the miles of river wall we have, and just anybody, I'm not an engineer, but anybody's uninformed eye looking at sections of that river wall further south, there are some major areas of concern, so it would be irresponsible for the city not to have, this is aside from even the downtown, the tall urbanized section of the river wall, there's a lot of sections that need maintenance that we haven't really, we've poured slurry concrete in, we've thrown rock in, but really hasn't had a true maintenance activity to it, so I've seen it in there. Just furthering the conversation that that's a critical area of maintenance.
Anyone else?
I guess, just on the project aside, those that have made their comments about the project, but addressing the river wall component, I guess I would hope that the committee would at least have some discussion or set a direction for us to, hearing how important it is to folks that we, and based upon the information you've heard tonight, have some discussion either now or at a future meeting as to directing that work and what further exploration or analysis needs to occur if that's the direction. Based upon the information that the contractor shared, $50,000 a year isn't even going to get us, maybe over a long period of time it gets us there, but it's really unknown, and the 50,000 could be a lot, it could be a little, depending on what the scope of work that's identified based upon the assessment.
I guess I'll make a motion to reject the bid and I guess table the project. And I don't know if I should make it within that. I can make a separate motion to address the river wall, should it need be. Or should I include it?
I think the city attorney's going to tell you all motions should be made in the affirmative.
Well, that's a good
what I
point.
like, but
So
whatever.
if somebody wants to make it an affirmative, but I don't know if anybody is. Oh, we could all vote it. I see what you mean. I'll make a motion to accept the bid as presented, with the options that were presented by the city engineer. Is that close enough, or do you want all the dollar amounts? And then I'll make a second motion after this to address the river wall.
Okay, I'll second Alderperson Blazer's motion. We have a motion and second on the floor. Any further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
All right, the motion fails. 2 nays, 1 aye. You said you...
Then I'd like to make a motion that, Joe addresses, or I guess follow up and try to obtain some of those unknowns. I don't know how you want to specifically state it, but to come up with a cost to do the river repair walls. And maybe a timetable, if we can do it in sections, or if it needs to be done, certain parts need to be done at one time versus another time.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Ayes have it.
What was the exact motion?
That we,
To accept the bid and authorize the award of the
The first one or
contract.
the
first
second
one?
one?
The
Second one. Basically to instruct staff to define a scope and time for river wall repairs.
Correct, thank you.
All right, next item is consider approval of an engineering design services contract with Jewel Associate Engineers Incorporated for the realignment of 3rd Avenue South, lying east of the Centralia Center. Start with you, Joe?
I think Joe's got this one too.
And I can start on this one, and then Joe could talk more about the specifics. Just as a reminder, this is part of a bigger project that the council had taken action to pursue, and that was to consider reworking the Market Square parking lot and realignment of Third Avenue for potential farmers market and parking and except any other related improvements that would be defined. I shared an email with all of you a little over a week, maybe not quite a week ago. Hopefully you got a chance to review that, as there's a lot more specifics in there that I'll share here. But in effect, the grant will not pay for design services, and so we sought proposals, and Joe could talk more about the specifics, but this is to fully recapture the city property that would be east of 3rd Avenue, as I stated, for the benefit of a farmer's market. There currently is a couple of folks that have committed to the project. If you recall Adam's presentation to this group, the state grant for $460,000, $70,000, somewhere in that ballpark, encourages contribution of $270,000, and then there's still a funding gap of up to $700,000, depending on the ultimate scope of the improvements in that parking lot. The council then had voted to pursue that at no cost to the city, and so that project still remains active, and there appears to be donors at this stage that are interested in meeting that gap. The donors are not interested in paying for the design of a city street, which in many respects is probably appropriate, right? That's the responsibility of the municipality. Now, we did negotiate within the state grant that they would consider the construction of the street as an eligible expenditure. So it was previously identified that the estimate, it was an early estimate, very preliminary estimate of the street construction was around $400,000. So one could argue that the state grant will pay for the street realignment, but it, of course, will not pay for any design costs for any improvements. So I'll let Joe talk about the specifics, and then we can come back to financing and all of that.
So there was a request for proposals that were sent out to 3 local engineering firms, given the short turnaround and local nature of the work. We sent it to Jewell & Associates, Quest Civil Engineers, and MSA. The results of their proposals are identified on the document that you have in the packet. Jewell & Associates was the low, or they weren't the low bid or low proposal, but based on everything that they provided in their document, in their proposal document, and the hours that they had identified, they have the lowest cost per hour, and I guess what we feel is a more appropriate amount of time that's going to be required to do the design. So that's the recommendation from staff, anyways, would be to pursue contract with Jewell & Associates for the realignment of 3rd Avenue.
Go ahead, Shane.
And that funding's coming from where? Within the budget?
Okay, sorry. So the financing we discussed, because it was about, what's it, 66,000? I was just
63,000.
63,000. So one of the funding sources we had discussed was Encourage, through our developers agreement, has been paying a minimum assessment to the city. So that was about $12,000 a year, I believe, and we've got 3 years currently unencumbered, so it has not been restricted for any or applied to any other use. So that would be the first funding source. And the second that Tim and I discussed was Public Works Construction Fund carrying the balance. So it was a little over 30,000 would come from Public Works Construction. I think one of the benefits that we can't forget or lose sight of, and I'll mention just for the benefit of the viewing public or anybody else that cares to hear it, is the fact that when the county took over leasing the river block, there has been a real parking crunch in the downtown area, especially because the Mead-Witter Foundation, the parking lot that used to go with the river block was not made available for parking purposes. So there's been somewhat of a perceived crunch. I don't know. There's a lot of opinions about parking. But I think one of the things that we can say with this project is that if we get the financing in order for the improvements, ultimately we're going to capture an additional 50-some spaces on street for parking. And given the amount of activity and the reinvestment just in that 5 block area, any additional parking will be welcome, and I think will go down as a positive for future development. It makes the theater block more attractive. It makes the Centralia Center, if we're going to continue to seek occupancy, we've got a fair amount of square footage in there that's vacant, that the city is currently carrying the cost on, that we'd love to get occupied again. But one of the challenges prospective tenants tell us is availability of parking. And by realigning the street, we put in street parking again, whereas now with the sweeping curve or the half curve, you don't have any opportunity for parking. So I would just make sure that we don't lose sight of that benefit. If we come out of this project, $1.5 million project in that area, having spent $65,000, I think it's a major win for the city. So I would just state that benefit in addition to the two financing sources that we, to answer your question, Shane.
Thank you. I was just gonna say, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the 63,000, or the bid from Jewel Associates. 63,118 and 6 cents. Yeah, and I don't, was this reconstructed, was this done for the Centralia project? Or when was that sweep put in there, does any, I don't know.
With Walmart Center.
Oh, was that, okay. To me, it makes sense to be straight anyways. And then Tamir said capturing some parking and hopefully find a use for that space that we're gaining will be nice.
I agree.
Potential
I'll
possible
second
use.
that motion.
All right, we have a motion and second. Thad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Mayor, can you give me a little bit more clarification? Maybe Tim can do it. The increment that the Encourage Foundation is giving us, is that in a restricted fund, or I thought that it was just general revenues?
It was.
Tim?
Yeah, it's in the TID fund, so because it's in the TID district, so net development and stuff, so the increment, or what they've been paying us has been remained in TID number 6. And then the realignment was a identified plan in the TID.
Realignment is an identified plan.
Yeah,
in the project.
when we amended the project plan, I think it was a couple years ago.
Maybe a year or two ago.
I do believe that was put in.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
All right, again, we have a motion and second. Any further?
Did we just spend money on that park last year?
Park. Oh,
For the Centralia Center, wasn't there a new sidewalk put in and?
All
There
outside,
was-
yeah, it was all outside of the footprint of what could be a street in the future. So
Oh, it was,
the
okay.
Centralia Center, yeah, the Senior Association, in the budget, we funded some improvements there, but yeah, there was an intention to make sure that if they did anything, that they were all within the footprint of the, and I think you shared the drawings with the designer, or there was some communication about where those improvements were to occur.
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, good question.
We're spending it. The other question I have is so we're saying by spending the $28,000, after that we're expecting other donors to come up and pay us to do this project, because currently we're short. And just going back, to what you had sent in the email, was that there might be additional support, but at this time there's no additional support. So if we spend the money to get the design work done for this, then let the project, what's the future cost to the city if the support doesn't come in?
So part of the acceleration of the schedule is because of the state grant. The state has said they will claw back the grant if the project costs are not encumbered in 2019 by December 31st. So in an ideal sense, we would have commitments from donors for a total project of $1.5 million, which, because the state grant has to be matched twice, we would have $1.5 million of a project, 400 of which is the street construction. The way we're talking to donors about this project is, first, the project doesn't happen if the costs are not raised privately. Right, the city council's already been on record that we're not pursuing any taxpayer dollars for any of the improvements to the real estate that would be non-street portion, right? So the current parking lot, and then when the street gets realigned, there's the real estate where the street currently is. So in an ideal sense, the donors would have been pursued, and they would have had commitments to the city by the time we would go forward with design. Because of the schedule, we cannot, from a construction standpoint, it's not it's probably not realistic to assume that we would construct the street after the donations are received, right? Because we probably have 60, the primary donor has notified us that they'll provide award in early June. So there's not enough time for us to design the project in June, let it for bidding, and construct it by the end of the year in that schedule. So that's why we're bringing a design contract to you before we have all the funding in hand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure it's clear that, I guess what I'm looking at is, you know, we had been told this before, that there would be private donors that were ready to step up, and then we turned around and spent $9.5 million of the taxpayers' money for the aquatic center, in which we only raised $21,000 from public, or from private donations.
I don't know what that has any, I would correct a number of those statements, but I guess, what is your question about the street realignment here?
My question is, I don't want the city council to be fooled in spending more money than what we would. You know, I always want things upfront and honest, and to sit and say that we're assuming that there's awards that are going to be let for projects from private donations, but yet we weren't able to secure private donations for the aquatic center, I feel like it's almost misleading to not just the aldermen, but also to the community, saying that this project's only going to happen.
Okay.
So that's where I'm.
Okay, well, I'll answer it this way. So while the state has set the upper bar for the total project cost, there's a good chance that that project cost could come in less, and therefore use less of the state grant.
Yep.
Because donations don't generate enough support to close the full $700,000 gap. So at that point, you know, the scope hasn't been fully fleshed out in terms of the cost, but I'm telling you how donors are communicating with me and how I'm foreseeing the project is we haven't budgeted for any dollars to be spent there. You know, we're only saying let's design the street if and when we're ready to construct it, and at that point we may draw down less than almost $500,000 of the grant, maybe draw down half. In that case, we have just under $1 million project. So, you know, there's not any commitment by the city to spend $1.5 million there, right? So whatever the donations generates the drawdown on the grant. So I'm not sure. Previously, the pool project had a scope with a cost. The city had decided to commit to the entire scope. This project doesn't have a scope.
Is the construction project is that something you're going to do? Is it state money, state contract?
I think Adam had to answer that previously. The state does not. Yeah, the city can't do that street with its crew and force and then get reimbursed.
Right.
It has to be privately led. Yep. At least for the purposes of the grant. Now, if there's grading work, or you know the project cost comes in over and they come to us and say, well, we want your city crews to remove the asphalt. You know, things like that I can see. You know, if it's not going to be material to the full project cost for the purposes of the grant, well then we can consider it. But at this point we don't have a schedule availability or a budget for any additional work there. So I'm with you. I'm sensitive to any additional costs that would have to be encumbered because of this accelerated project, because the state has told us one thing with a grant. A couple of donors in the community have stepped forward and saying we see the vision, we want to help make it a reality, you know, really without any expectation that the taxpayers are going to cover a portion of it. So I'm right with you. I mean, believe me, I didn't plan to have this added to my week every week to make this happen. I have other things that we could be spending our time on, city staff time on at this stage. So,
Question, Joe.
Just for clarity, the $63,000 is a turnkey value, so it includes design, bidding, and construction services. So in the event that, you know, the project gets designed but it doesn't go for construction, that cost would be reduced by the bidding amount and the bidding services and the construction services for Jewel.
Anyone else? Okay, and the motion was to approve the amount for the design cost. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Next item, consider a resolution accepting a bid and authorizing the award of a contract for construction of the Wisconsin Rapids Recreation Complex to the Myron Construction Company Incorporated. Start with you on that one, Mayor.
well, this is one of the more exciting steps. I think we've spent a lot of time getting to this stage, staff time, public meetings, design conversations, and we weren't really sure where the bids would ultimately come in, because it's been over a year since we've conceivably finished the design of the project, and we had anticipated cost increases. There was already one cost increase incorporated into the project some time ago. So I'm very pleased to share that we had two bidders, not just one bidder, two bidders on the project that gave us a favorable bid, and basically at the construction estimates or slightly below, and puts the city in a position of being able to get construction underway. We've had discussion at our last couple of meetings about worst case scenario financing for the project, and I believe that information's been fully discussed and debated. I would say on that front that what's in the back of some of the donors' minds as of late has been, is this really a project that the city is committed to? Is it serious about? In the sense that if a donor says, I want my name on it for a certain dollar level, there's been a hesitation, because there's at least three other projects that are in the community that are soliciting funds. And if this project happens to get started later or get done later than some of those others, well, they're probably going to give higher priority to the other projects. So I think this is an exciting moment for a lot of reasons, not only from a community member standpoint for those that have really wanted a new city pool, but for the sake of donors and our donor outreach that we've got. Conceivably, if the decision is to move forward, we've got a year to back down the worst case scenario and to really aggressively get after a 1-year capital campaign. And we know our project gap is somewhere north of $3 million. The previous donor that's been now named has upped their ante to $3 million. So I think this is go time from a financing standpoint. I firmly believe as a taxpayer that we should get every dollar that this community is willing to contribute to the project on the table and committed to the project. But again, this project is in some form gone on for over a decade, and I think donors are very gun shy that the city is committed to it. And I think tonight's decision, if it is to move forward, will give folks the certainty that it needs to be able to financially make a commitment to the project. So those would be my opening comments, and I don't know if anybody else from a logistical standpoint or bid standpoint, if Joe wants to address those.
I have to apologize, but I forgot. What were the bid alternates?
So the alternates was the outside the fence items, the tennis court rebuild, the park area, the playground area, the geyser pad outside, the landscaping and walkways, the pedestrian ways outside of the facility was the alternate.
Okay. And do we need to do the bid alternate to be awarded the grant?
For the sake of the Legacy Foundation, correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. At least commit to doing it, not necessarily that Myron does it at this cost. I think that could be another option for us. I mean, it did come in higher than Brickell Brothers, but we haven't validated that number and don't know if that's firm or complete.
Because that is $1 million, almost just shy of $1 million. So
Correct.
I just want to make sure that we're able to. For the sake of argument, if we didn't do alternate one, we're still eligible. Alternate one at this time, we're still eligible to get the grant.
We would be ineligible to receive the grant.
We would
if
be ineligible.
Ineligible if we
Okay.
decided to not do alternate one.
Okay.
And
Okay.
like I said, you could maybe set a different direction within there.
No, I'm just curious.
Sure. And I think just for benefit of everyone, those alternate items are the ones that are more appealing, I think, to donors than just having a dollar go towards a pool that doesn't really have a representation from a brand, from a name recognition or a representation.
No, it broadens the use of the space.
Right.
Just a couple comments, maybe for those watching. The low bid was Myron Construction at 10.8 million. The other bid was from Brickell Brothers at 13 million. From our project estimates, we had estimated a project at 10.9 million, which means the favorable or the low bid, the apparent low bidder came in $106,515 under budget on a $10 million project. That's really astonishing. We were concerned because we have seen a number of other project prices be significantly over and, over estimates. And so I guess as staff, we were pretty excited to see these numbers come in almost right on what was estimated. And, one of the questions at the last meeting was the potential use of the warming house. That was something that Myron had expressed in their bid, that they were interested in using that, and that those cost savings are reflected in their bid numbers. I guess that's about all I have, unless there's some other questions that I can help with.
Jake wanted to speak next.
Oh, if anybody else wants to know. Oh,
Go ahead.
sure. I'm going to make a motion to accept the bid and authorize the award of the contract for construction of the Wisconsin Rapids Recreation Complex to Myron Construction Company.
I'll second. We have a motion, second.
Again, I'm just gonna say I'm reluctantly voting in favor of this for the reasons that I've spoken to before. I'm concerned about the potential taxpayer borrow next year. As Tom eloquently put at our last council meeting, this council didn't get to decide on the project much, but we have to decide on paying for it. Which, almost for the same reason, we should vote no, because we inherited it. But I'm going to vote in favor of it, but I'm not in favor of it. Just because I think we've walked down the path far enough where it's financially irresponsible to turn around and go the other way.
I guess I'll just take a moment to share my thoughts on a lot of this stuff. I'm in favor of this. I obviously am an alderman, which makes me a citizen of this community. And one of the number one things I hear from people when I'm out and about is, we don't have anything here. We don't have a pool. Our shopping is dwindling. Shopko's going to be closing their doors probably by June. We keep losing stuff out of this community. Boulder's growing, Point's growing, other places are growing except us. I mean, we do have Metalco coming in, which hopefully that brings people into our community. But even with a big company like Metalco coming in, if we don't have anything here, the people that potentially get jobs here, they're not going to want to have their families live in this community. I mean, people want stuff in the community. They want a swimming pool. They want a farmer's market. They want stuff to do other than having to get in their car and drive a minimum of 20 minutes to go do something else. I'm not in favor of frivolously spending money by any means, but I am in favor of making significant investments in a community that grows your community. And I know that there's hesitation on putting money into the swimming pool, but it's an investment in the community. And as I said at council, it doesn't mean that somebody later can't come by and give us a check. And as the mayor alluded to in his comments, that maybe by the actions that this committee and the council takes to show the people that we are serious about getting this done, that might ease some of the reservations that people have about making contributions to this project. I think we've been without a pool for 3-4 years now. I think it's time that we get it done, and here's our opportunity to get it done.
I just want to make a comment on paragraph section 6G, Legacy Foundation, on your paperwork. It is the goal of the foundation to minimize the amount of funds that the city will borrow and end up being the responsibility of the taxpayers. And I just personally want to reach out to the Legacy Foundation and say thank you for keeping in mind the taxpayers and making sure that we're trying to be responsible. And that's my comment here.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Item number 5, Consider executing a grant agreement and accepting a grant from the Legacy Foundation of Central Wisconsin for funds for the Wisconsin Rapids Recreation Complex. Start with you, Mayor.
You've all seen the grant agreement. It's also in your packets if you haven't seen it. It's for a $2.5 million direct grant with an additional $500,000 of a matching grant, of which we'll have to match with new sources that would have, so previous commitments from those, I think $125,000 or $120,000 that was previously committed to the project from the community could not be considered as matching, so we're gonna have to continue to seek matches for the $500,000 in order for that to kick in. Otherwise, it's a straightforward grant agreement. It's similar to the grant agreements we've executed with them on other projects, like the splash pad and the police department community, I think what the program is called. Anyway, the grant we've done with the police department. So there shouldn't be anything in there that's too much of concern. It wasn't, at least I don't believe at a staff level, if anybody had anything they wanted to discuss, but otherwise, of course, that's $3 million of the $10 million for construction, plus any of the other soft costs that we have to incur yet, furnishings and the architectural services that we've rendered on the project toward the pool.
I'll make a motion to approve the grant and accept the award.
I think this is an easy one. I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, committee will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next item is motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Nobody seconded it.
Who was it? I'll take a second. You can sign my name.
All right, just for record, we'll do a motion to adjourn.
I made it.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We stand adjourned at 6:08.